Beneath the pale witness of an indifferent moon, the Atlantic Ocean stretches like a liquid desert, vast and merciless, swallowing any hope of a horizon. At first glance, the scene holds a macabre beauty. The waves shimmer with silvery reflections, and the wind blows with a deceptive steadiness. Yet as we draw closer to the dark silhouette cutting through the waters, the illusion of serenity violently dissolves. What floats there is not merely a vessel of wood and sails, but a floating coffin, a monument to human greed built upon unspeakable suffering. The sound of the sea striking the hull tries in vain to drown out the noise rising from the ship's depths, a low, continuous and unsettling hum composed of groans, dragging chains, and whispered prayers in dozens of different languages. The air around the vessel is thick, heavy not with sea spray, but with a fetid miasma rising from the hatches, a sharp stench of fear, disease, and confined bodies. On this particular night, the ship seems to vibrate with a different energy, an electric tension that makes the sailors on deck shudder. It is not only the wood creaking under the pressure of the waters, it is the very human soul being tested at its absolute limits. The attentive observer perceives that, although the sails are full and the course maintained, something fundamental has changed in the atmosphere. The ocean, silent witness to centuries of crossings, seems to hold its breath, awaiting the unfolding of a tragedy that refuses to remain silent. We are about to descend into the belly of the beast, where darkness is tangible and time drags with the weight of iron shackles. To understand the gravity of this night, we must comprehend the cruel geography that imprisons these souls. We are in the heart of the Middle Passage, the most terrible stretch of the triangular trade that connects continents through pain and profit. The ship is a tiny speck in a blue immensity separating the coast of West Africa from the destination ports in the Americas. Here, geography is not shaped by mountains or valleys, but by impassable distances and abyssal depths. The very reason for this vessel's existence is purely economic. Every wooden plank, every meter of rope, and every ration of water has been calculated to maximize the transport of human cargo. The ship was not designed for comfort, but for storage capacity, transforming human beings into perishable merchandise in the ledgers of European merchants. The cold logic of capital ignores the beating humanity in the hold, reducing complex lives to statistical figures of loss and gain. We are suspended in an existential limbo, where the past in the homeland has been brutally severed and the future is a terrifying unknown of perpetual slavery. The isolation is absolute. Hundreds of miles from any solid ground, the ship becomes an autonomous universe governed by laws of violence and survival. The water surrounding the vessel is at once the jailer and the only escape into death. In this geographic void, where the stars of the southern hemisphere begin to emerge as strangers in the sky, the notion of time dissolves. Days and nights merge into an endless cycle of swaying and nausea. It is in this setting of total isolation, far from the eyes of justice or divine mercy, that true human nature is revealed, stripped of civility and exposed in its rawest and most desperate form. We now descend into the hold, where sensory reality defies any literary description. The heat down here is a physical entity, a solid and suffocating mass generated by the breathing of hundreds of crowded bodies. The lack of ventilation turns the air into a slow poison, saturated with humidity and odors that would make even the strongest man faint. The darkness is nearly complete, broken only by slivers of light filtering down from the upper deck, illuminating dust and despair. The bodies are arranged with cruel geometric efficiency, side by side, often without even enough space to turn their torsos. Skin rubs against skin, sweat mixes with tears and blood, creating a forced and grotesque intimacy among strangers who often do not speak the same language. The sound is a muffled cacophony, the metallic clinking of shackles binding ankles and wrists, the low crying of those who have lost hope, and the rhythmic groan of the wooden hull creaking like breaking bones. Feeding is a ritual of degradation, often served in collective troughs, where the struggle for a handful of flour or a gulp of foul water can mean the difference between surviving another day or succumbing. The ship's rocking is not gentle down here. It is violent, hurling bodies against one another, causing injuries that quickly become infected in the unsanitary environment. The tumbero, as it is known, does not allow restorative sleep. What exists instead is a state of feverish semi-consciousness, interrupted by nightmares and the constant surveillance of the guards. Every breath is a battle, every movement a calculated torture. It is a daily life reduced to the most basic biology, where dignity was stripped away on the coast, yet where, paradoxically, the will to live burns with a furious and silent intensity. Above the hold on the deck, there exists another layer of tension, sustained by a fragile and paranoid power structure. The crew, although armed with muskets, sabers, and whips, lives under the constant shadow of fear. They know they are numerically inferior to the human cargo they are transporting. To maintain control, the ship has been transformed into a floating fortress. The most striking feature of this architecture of control is the Barricado, a tall wall of reinforced wood, often covered with iron spikes and equipped with swivel cannons pointed directly at the main hatch. This barrier divides the ship into two worlds: the stern, where the captain and officers attempt to maintain an appearance of civility and command, and the bow and the hold, where contained chaos reigns. Organization on board is military, but discipline is enforced through terror. The crew watches the sea and the deck with sleepless eyes, interpreting every glance from the captives, every untranslated whisper as the prelude to a mutiny. The captain, the ultimate figure of authority, studies his maps and logbooks, trying to rationalize the brutality of his mission with calculations of profit, yet his ears are always attuned to the noises rising from the depths of the ship. The violence imposed by the sailors is not merely sadism, it is a tactic of preventive survival. They know that if the barrier of fear is broken, the accumulated fury in the hold will be uncontrollable. Thus, the routine of surveillance is exhausting, with double shifts and weapons always loaded. Power here does not emanate from respect or law, but from gunpowder and steel, sustained by an architecture designed specifically to prevent the human mass below from realizing its own collective strength and the vulnerability of its executioners. On this specific night, the tension reaches its breaking point. Something has shifted in the dynamics of the hold. What began as banzo, the deep and deadly melancholy, has slowly transformed into a cold, calculating fury. The fragility of the slave system lies precisely in its underestimation of the humanity of the captives. While the crew relies on their iron shackles, in the darkness, men and women from different ethnicities and nations have found a common language: resistance. A glance exchanged during the distribution of water, the imperceptible loosening of a bolt pin, a rhythm softly tapped into the wood. The storm forming outside, churning the sea and causing the ship to list dangerously, provides the perfect cover. The noise of the waves masks the sound of metal being forced. The crew, distracted by the need to adjust the sails to face the wind, makes the fatal mistake of relaxing their watch over the hatch for brief minutes. It is in this interval of vulnerability that the rebellion is born. Not with an immediate battle cry, but with the sudden and absolute silence that precedes the attack. The fear that once paralyzed the captives now transforms into a suicidal courage. They know death is likely, but freedom, even if it lasts only the span of a final breath on deck, is worth the price. The tension in the air is almost solid. The wood groans, not only from the sea, but from the pressure of bodies preparing for the uprising. The oppressive organization of the ship, with all its weapons and barricades, suddenly seems insignificant, before the collective will emerging from the depths. The night that should have been one of rest becomes the night the ship does not sleep, for the human spirit has decided it will no longer accept chains without demanding a high price in blood. The revolt of that night, whether crushed in blood or victorious for brief moments, left an indelible mark on the history of the Atlantic. Many of those who fought were thrown into the sea, joining the millions who make up the Kalunga Grande, the submerged cemetery that connects Africa to the Americas. Yet the act of resistance itself transcends physical death. It planted the seed that dehumanization was never passively accepted. The legacy of these ships is not only the tragedy and trauma that shaped the societies of the New World, but also the unbreakable strength of those who survived to build new cultures, new music, and new ways of existing upon the ruins of violence. The ocean, now calm and blue for cruise tourists, holds within its currents the memory of those sleepless nights. Every wave that breaks upon the shore carries the echo of those voices that refused to be silenced. History did not end when the ships were retired. It lives in the DNA of entire nations and in the ongoing struggle for equality and recognition. To look back at this historical darkness is not merely an act of mourning, but an act of acknowledging human resilience in the face of absolute horror. We, as observers of the present, have a duty not to look away, to listen to what the wind and the sea still try to tell us about the price of our modernity, to continue uncovering these stories that time tried to erase, and to honor the memory of those who crossed the ocean against their will. Subscribe to the channel now and activate notifications. History is alive, and together we will not allow it to be forgotten.